Boston, Massachusetts, a city where history lives in every brick and every narrow street. When daylight fades, Beacon Hill becomes strangely quiet. Rain falls softly onto the old cobblestones. Fog rolls between the gas lamps, and the centuries-old houses seem to watch everyone who passes. Most people believe these streets are only filled with history, but some believe something much older is still hiding beneath them. On a cold October evening, Ethan Marshall, a 31-year-old restoration contractor, arrived at one of Beacon Hill's oldest homes. The brick townhouse had survived wars, fires, and generations of owners. From the outside it looked abandoned, yet every window seemed to reflect a darkness that wasn't caused by the storm. The owner, Margaret Lawson, opened the heavy wooden door and silently handed Ethan an old brass key. "You'll be working alone," she said. Ethan smiled politely, thinking she was simply worried about the building. As he stepped inside, Margaret spoke again. "If you hear a bell after midnight, don't stay. Leave immediately." Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried genuine fear. Ethan thanked her, convinced it was nothing more than a local ghost story. The following hours passed quietly. Ethan removed damaged floorboards, inspected old beams, and measured cracked walls. Dust floated through the flashlight beam while rain tapped gently against the windows. Every creak of the ancient house sounded normal, until his crowbar struck something hollow beneath the dining room floor. Curious, Ethan removed more wooden boards. Hidden beneath decades of flooring was a rusty iron ring attached to a heavy wooden trapdoor. Cold air escaped as he slowly pulled it open. A narrow staircase disappeared into complete darkness below. The house plans never mentioned a basement. Yet one existed. Holding his flashlight tightly, Ethan carefully walked down the ancient stone steps. The air grew colder with every step. Thick spiderwebs covered the ceiling. Water dripped from cracked walls, and the silence became almost unbearable. It felt as though no one had entered this place for centuries. At the bottom of the staircase, Ethan entered a hidden chamber. In its center rested a massive bronze bell unlike any he had ever seen. Strange symbols covered its surface from top to bottom. The bell wasn't hanging from a tower. It sat directly on the stone floor, as if it had been placed there for a reason no one remembered. As Ethan explored the chamber, he noticed hundreds of names carved into the surrounding walls. Every name ended with the same year, 1893. Then one carving caught his attention. Unlike the others, it looked fresh. It read, "Ethan Marshall." His heart stopped. How could his name already be there? Ethan stepped backward in disbelief. Without anyone touching it, the enormous bronze bell released a single deep tone. Boom! The sound shook the chamber. Dust poured from the ceiling, and the ancient symbols on the bell glowed faintly in the darkness. The vibration lingered far longer than it should have, as though it had awakened something sleeping beneath the city. Then came footsteps, slow, heavy, each one echoing through the darkness beyond the chamber. Ethan switched off his flashlight and held his breath. The footsteps stopped only a few feet away. For a long moment, there was complete silence. Then a cold whisper drifted through the darkness. "You rang it." Ethan's blood turned to ice. He wasn't alone beneath Beacon Hill. The whisper echoed through the chamber. "You rang it." Ethan's body froze. His hands trembled as he slowly raised his flashlight toward the darkness. Standing beside the ancient bronze bell was a man dressed in the tattered uniform of a church caretaker. Rusty iron chains hung from his arms and chest, dragging across the stone floor. His pale skin looked cracked like old marble, and his hollow eyes reflected no light. The figure never blinked. Instead, he stared directly at Ethan. "I have been waiting," the caretaker said in a cold, lifeless voice. "For the next guardian." Terrified, Ethan turned and ran toward the staircase. His flashlight swept across the chamber, but the stairs were gone. In their place stood a solid stone wall, as though the staircase had never existed. Ethan pounded his fists against the cold stone. "No, this can't be happening." His breathing became faster. There was no way out. He was trapped beneath Beacon Hill. The chained caretaker slowly pointed toward the giant bronze bell. "This bell is not a warning," he whispered. "It is a prison." The moment it rang, the seal was broken. Ethan looked at the strange symbols carved into the bronze surface. They glowed faintly with an unnatural light. "What is trapped here?" he asked. The caretaker lowered his head. "Something that I must never see daylight again." Without warning, the stone walls began to shake. A sharp scraping sound echoed through the chamber. Ethan turned in horror as invisible hands carved fresh names into the ancient stone. Letters appeared one by one. Some belonged to people who had vanished more than a century ago. Others were recent: a firefighter, a police officer, a tourist. Every name ended the same way, with a date of death. Then the scratching stopped. Only one empty space remained on the wall. Waiting for the next name, Ethan slowly walked toward the wall, unable to take his eyes off the fresh carvings. His flashlight trembled in his hand. Then his heart nearly stopped. Carved into the cold stone, as if it had been there for years, were the words, "Ethan Marshall." Beneath his name, another line slowly began to appear. Invisible claws scraped across the stone, carving today's date one letter at a time. Ethan stumbled backward. "No, this can't be real." The caretaker looked at him with empty eyes. "The wall never lies. It records every soul the bell chooses." Before Ethan could speak again, a soft voice echoed through the chamber. "Don't believe everything he says." Ethan quickly turned toward the sound. At the entrance of a narrow tunnel stood a little girl wearing a faded blue Victorian dress. Her long dark hair was damp, and her pale face looked frightened rather than evil. She quietly raised one hand and motioned for Ethan to come closer. "My name is Emily," she whispered. "I've been trapped here for a very long time." The caretaker lowered his head but said nothing. Emily slowly disappeared into the darkness. As she vanished, small wet footprints appeared on the ancient stone floor, stretching into the narrow tunnel beyond the chamber. Ethan looked at the caretaker. The ghostly man remained perfectly still. "If you stay here," he said quietly, "the bell will claim you. If you follow her," he paused, "you may discover the truth." The tunnel was silent. Only the trail of wet footprints remained. Taking a deep breath, Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight and followed the footprints into the forgotten passage. The tunnel grew narrower with every step. Ancient brick walls surrounded him, covered in faded symbols unlike anything he had ever seen. Cold water dripped from the ceiling. A thick mist rolled across the floor. Somewhere ahead, Emily's faint silhouette appeared for only a moment before disappearing again into the darkness. Then Ethan heard something else. A slow, deep breathing. Not his own. Something far ahead in the tunnel. Something enormous. Waiting. Without realizing it, Ethan had left the bell behind and entered a place where no living person had walked for more than a century. Ethan followed Emily's tiny wet footprints deeper into the forgotten tunnel. His flashlight barely reached through the thick mist. Ancient brick walls surrounded him on both sides, covered with strange symbols that seemed to shimmer whenever the light passed over them. The farther he walked, the colder the air became. Behind him, the tunnel disappeared into darkness. Ahead, there was only silence. Then Ethan saw Emily standing at the end of the passage. She was waiting for him for the first time. Ethan could clearly see Emily's face. She looked no older than 8 years old. Her faded blue dress was soaked, and strands of wet black hair hung around her pale face. "You need to understand something," she whispered. Ethan stepped closer. "Who are you?" "My name is Emily." She looked toward the darkness behind Ethan. "I've been here for 127 years. Ethan stared at her. "You're dead?" Emily slowly nodded. "I was the last child who tried to stop the bell." She pointed toward a massive iron door behind her. "And what is behind that door should never be allowed to escape." Ethan turned toward the door. It was enormous, made from ancient iron and covered with layers of rust. Thick chains wrapped around it from top to bottom. Strange symbols had been carved into the metal, identical to those on the bronze bell. Ethan approached cautiously. "What is this place?" Emily's expression changed. "The bell isn't the curse." She paused. "It's the lock." A deep rumble suddenly shook the tunnel. Dust fell from the ceiling. Emily stepped backward. The lock is beginning to fail. Beyond the iron door was an enormous circular chamber. Ethan's flashlight revealed ancient stone walls covered in glowing symbols. Broken pillars surrounded a dark opening in the center of the room. It looked less like a basement and more like a prison built for something enormous. Emily stood beside Ethan. More than 200 years ago, workers digging beneath Beacon Hill found this place. They thought it was an ancient underground chamber, but it wasn't. Ethan stared into the darkness. "What did they find?" Emily whispered. "A prisoner." Emily told Ethan what had happened long ago. The thing beneath Beacon Hill could speak directly into people's minds. It promised wealth, power, and eternal life. People who listened began disappearing. Families turned against each other. Fear spread through the city. Finally, priests, blacksmiths, and stonemasons joined together to imprison the creature. They created the enormous bronze bell, but the bell wasn't built to be heard. It was built to keep the prison sealed. For generations, one guardian remained below Beacon Hill, watching the bell and protecting the city above. But every 100 years, the prison weakened, and the bell demanded another guardian. Ethan suddenly remembered the chained caretaker. That's why he was down there. Emily nodded. He wasn't protecting the bell. He was protecting everyone above it. A deafening metallic crack suddenly echoed through the chamber. Ethan turned toward the prison door. One of the enormous chains had snapped. The broken metal struck the floor with tremendous force. Dust filled the air. The ancient symbols began glowing brighter. Emily screamed. "No!" Another chain pulled violently against the door. It bent. Then another chain began to crack. Ethan raised his flashlight. Something was moving behind the door. Something huge. A long, black hand slowly pushed through the opening. Its fingers were impossibly thin and unnaturally long. Sharp claws scraped across the stone floor. The sound echoed through the chamber. Ethan couldn't move. The hand slowly curled around the edge of the broken doorway. Black smoke poured through the gap. Then a voice emerged from the darkness. "So many years." The creature paused. And finally, another deep rumble shook the chamber. Someone opened the way. The prison door began to bend outward. Two enormous white eyes appeared behind it. Ethan stepped backward, his flashlight shaking in his hand. The creature's body remained hidden within a mass of black smoke, but its presence seemed to fill the entire chamber. The ancient symbols on the walls flickered violently. Above them, somewhere on the streets of Boston, windows began rattling. Church bells started ringing in the distance. Emily looked at Ethan with terror. "The final chain is breaking." Ethan stared at the creature. Then it smiled. Not with a human mouth, but with something hidden inside the darkness. And Ethan finally understood. The bell had never been calling the creature. The bell had been keeping it asleep. And now it was awake. The creature's enormous hand tightened around the edge of the broken prison door. Stone cracked beneath its claws. Black smoke poured into the chamber as the creature slowly forced its way through the opening. Its glowing white eyes fixed on Ethan. Then its voice entered his mind. "Break the last chain." Ethan covered his ears, but the voice continued. It wasn't coming from the creature anymore. It was coming from inside his own head. Emily suddenly grabbed Ethan's arm. "Don't listen to it." Her voice trembled. "It can make you hear whatever you fear most." The creature began whispering again. "You've always been alone. No one will remember you. You can leave this place. Just free me." For a moment, Ethan almost believed it. Then Emily pointed toward the bell chamber. "There's still one way to stop it. The bell." Ethan looked toward the darkness. "What happens if I ring it?" Emily's expression became painfully sad. "The prison will close, but whoever rings the bell must become its next guardian." A figure appeared through the mist. The ancient caretaker. His rusty chains were breaking apart, and his pale body looked almost transparent. He walked toward Ethan and placed an old iron hammer into his hands. "I have guarded this place for more than a century. My time is finished." Ethan looked at the hammer. "Why me?" The caretaker stared toward the creature. "Because the bell chose you." Then he stepped backward into the darkness. "Do what I could not." A deafening crack shook the chamber. The final chain snapped. The ancient prison door flew open. The creature surged forward, surrounded by black smoke. The entire underground chamber began collapsing. Stones fell from the ceiling. The floor shook beneath Ethan's boots. Above them, Boston trembled. Windows rattled throughout Beacon Hill. Church bells across the city began ringing by themselves. The creature opened its enormous arms. It was finally free. Ethan raised the iron hammer. The creature lunged toward him. Ethan swung the hammer with everything he had. Boo! The hammer struck the ancient bronze bell. A tremendous wave of golden light exploded through the chamber. Every symbol on the bell ignited. The sound traveled through the stone walls and into the tunnels beneath Boston. The creature screamed. Ethan struck the bell again. Boo! Golden energy wrapped around the creature. It fought against the invisible force, but the ancient prison was rebuilding itself. Ethan raised the hammer for one final strike and brought it down. Boo! The entire world seemed to go silent. Golden chains of light erupted from the walls. They wrapped around the creature's enormous body, dragging it backward into the darkness. The creature screamed Ethan's name. "Ethan!" The ancient prison door slammed shut. New iron chains appeared across it. The glowing symbols slowly faded. The creature was trapped once again. The underground chamber became completely silent. The evil beneath Beacon Hill had been sealed, but Ethan had paid the price. Ethan turned around. Emily was standing behind him. For the first time, she was smiling. Her ghostly body began glowing softly. "I can finally go home." Ethan watched as Emily's body slowly dissolved into thousands of tiny golden particles. They floated upward like fireflies. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she disappeared, for the first time in 127 years. Emily was free hours later. Morning sunlight entered the townhouse, but Ethan never returned. The hidden chamber had disappeared. The staircase was gone. The bell was gone. There was nothing beneath the floor except solid earth. Months passed. The townhouse reopened to visitors. People walked through its historic rooms every day. No one knew what had happened beneath their feet. But deep below Beacon Hill, Ethan stood beside the ancient bronze bell. Rusty chains wrapped around his arms and chest. His eyes slowly opened. They were no longer blue. They glowed pale white. He had become the new guardian. One rainy October evening, months later, a maintenance worker was repairing the townhouse floor. He stopped suddenly. From somewhere beneath him came a faint sound. Boom! He stared at the floor. Another sound followed. Boom! Curiosity overcame fear. He removed several old floorboards. Beneath them, he discovered a rusty iron ring, exactly where Ethan had found it. The workers slowly pulled the trapdoor open. Cold air rushed upward. A dark staircase disappeared beneath the house. He raised his flashlight, then stepped down. Far below, Ethan opened his glowing eyes. He heard footsteps approaching, and from the darkness, he whispered the words that had begun everything. "You rang it?" The light from the worker's flashlight disappeared, and somewhere beneath Boston, the bell rang once more. Boo-ong!